Morning, everyone. I am so pleased to be here with my incredible colleagues because here in DC this week, there has been a lot of attention consumed by the MAGA majority and their chaos. But we are here to reorient the focus onto what the rest of the country is worried about. On Sunday, the Washington Post profiled one of Americans' top concerns: the crippling cost of childcare. Here's how one mom put it: what is going to help my family? What is going to help my community? Right now, it's about childcare. But instead of doing something about the high cost of childcare, Republicans have let things get worse. As a result of their inaction, $15 billion additional dollars in child care funding is set to expire in just 5 days on September 30th. Democrats have responded by doing the job we signed up for: finding solutions. Today we're offering two pieces of legislation that would strengthen our child care system, build more classrooms, and recruit more talent into early education. If you're a parent, an educator, or a business owner, you know how broken our child care system is. Child care is too expensive and too hard to find. Early educators are overworked and underpaid. 4 in 10 parents have been forced to take on debt just to pay for their child care. And a third of all children under 5 don't have any formal care at all. All of this is a drag on the quality of our children's education, the financial security of working families, and the strength of our entire economy, to the tune of $122 billion a year in lost earnings, productivity, and tax revenue. Congress has the power to solve this. With this legislation we're introducing, we mark a step forward, relieving the pressure on parents, setting up the next generation for a lifetime of success. Our first bill, the Childcare Infrastructure Act, would invest $10 billion in the construction and renovation of child care facilities, and order a national audit of our child care infrastructure, identifying exactly where the most help is needed. Our second bill, the Child Care Workforce Development Act, would tackle the nationwide shortage of early educators, providing up to $4,000 in annual support if you study early education, and repaying up to $30,000 in student loans once you are in a job. All of this is common sense. But across the aisle, there is an explicit plan to take us backwards, all laid out in Project 2025. MAGA Republicans want to make childcare even more expensive, even harder to find. And their first step is the elimination of Head Start. But they're not done there. They go on to eliminate the Department of Education and take the public out of public schools by privatizing it. Democrats today are offering another path, where students don't get the bare minimum, they get the best. Where parents just don't get by, they get ahead. Where early educators aren't taken for granted, they get paid and honored like the essential workers they are. Where our businesses thrive and our economy is able to soar. That is our vision. And leading the way is one of our most outspoken champions for childcare, Ranking Member Suzanne Bonamici.
Thank you. Thank you, Whip Clark, for your leadership. Thank you for everyone for being here today. Childcare is infrastructure, and the best investment we can make is in our nation's children. Childcare is critical for early learning and for social and emotional development, and it really does set kids up for success. During the pandemic, we had the childcare stabilization grants and childcare and development funding. Those important investments helped ease the financial burden on families and on childcare providers. They also allowed childcare programs to do something really important, and that's support the infrastructure, the rent, the renovations, the improvements to meet health and safety standards. Those are a critical part of caring for our nation's children. And for high quality early childhood education and childcare, we need strong early childhood educators, safe teacher child ratios, curriculum, and importantly, we need the physical environment. And the facilities are often an afterthought to our detriment. Now, I've spoken with many Oregonians, often women, but this is affecting families and businesses as well. And people have been really limited by the lack of access to affordable childcare. So we need funding to improve and build those facilities so we can meet that demand and the need that we know is there for childcare. And that's exactly what the childcare infrastructure grants in one of these two important bills will do. The grants will allow more providers to remain open. They can serve more children in high quality early learning environments and importantly, lower costs for families. I'm very grateful to Whip Clark for her leadership and also thank all the dedicated providers who are caring for and nurturing our nation's children. The need for childcare is clear. We can help meet that need by increasing federal investments, and that's exactly what we need to do. I will continue advocating for this legislation, both of these bills, until they get across the finish line because we know they are good for children, good for families, and good for the economy. Now, I mentioned that childcare doesn't just affect children and mothers, it affects families. And here to talk about that is my great colleague from California, Representative Jimmy Gomez, a dad.
Thank you so much. Thank you, first Whip Clark. I'm not only a dad, I'm a dad of a toddler, and I have the battle scars to prove it. But first, let me just thank you for Whip Clark for her leadership and her continued partnership with dads. As the founder of the Dads Caucus, we founded it to fight for family-friendly policies, specifically the enhanced child tax credit, paid leave, and of course, affordable child care. And I'll do anything for my son, and I think most people would do anything for their children. And I think a lot of parents feel that way. But across the country, child care costs way too much, plain and simple. And this is where you see, at least on average, 25% of families' income going towards child care. We think that that's not a big deal, but it is when you add the fact that the average American family is also paying 30% of their income towards housing. And this is an issue that impacts these families so greatly that they have to decide, what are they going to do? Do we, try to get a family member to take care of the child if we can? Most can't. Or do we put them into child care that costs way too much, that prohibits them from saving for college, that prohibits them from, putting money into their 401ks, that helps them build that future? Or does one of them step out of the workforce? And that when they do that, it's always, oftentimes it's the mother, for a variety of reasons, because of simple family economics. Historically, women, as we know, make less than men, and it's often that burden falls on women. That means that they're not putting money into 401ks, they're not paying money into Social Security. So if you care about the economics of families and economics of women, you got to care about child care. And then even a former Secretary of the Treasury, Jack Lew, said there's two things that are bringing down the growth of our GDP itself: child care and housing. So if we want to uplift families and we want to tackle and lower costs for families, childcare is the best way to do it. Right now, I have conversations with the building trades. They have pilot programs on childcare. Why do the building trades care about childcare? Because you can't build our nation's infrastructure without the workers being able to get to work. And if they don't have childcare, they can't do that. So this is about our economy as much as it is about our families. These two bills help with that. It helps, one, make sure that our kids have a safe place to go to during the day, a safe child care facility. And then it also helps bring more child care providers into the system. And if we have high quality child care, more people are going to be, and that lowers the cost, people are going to be more inclined to take their children there. This is a top issue. We have a plan. The GOP doesn't have a plan. They don't even talk about it. In Ways and Means this week, we had an opportunity to have a hearing on child care, the child tax credit, and our Republican colleagues chose not to, right? It's a number one issue. So I think that if we want to uplift families, we need to make sure that we invest in childcare, and we're going to make this as a part of a top priority, not only for the Democrats in the House. We'll also try to force the Senate to follow our lead for once. With that, I know that Jennifer McClellan isn't here, but I'm going to hand it over to somebody who is Dad's Caucus is both men and women, both mothers and fathers. And I want to just thank Brittany Pedersen, who is an excellent mother, and she's here fighting for families from Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. My name is Brittany Pedersen, and I represent Colorado's 7th Congressional District. I'm a mom of a 4-year-old and also expecting another son at the end of January, which is very exciting. But I know firsthand the struggles that people are going through accessing childcare and being able to afford it. In the legislature before I came to Congress, I had the opportunity to work on these issues, but it really hit home once I was pregnant and touring. I was only a few months in, looking at where I was going to send my son to daycare, and I ended up having to get on a 3-year waiting list while I was pregnant. And so it is completely different to work on it, to hear about it, and then to go through it firsthand and see how absolutely impossible it is for people to access childcare. This was right before the pandemic, and so the only reason that I was able to get my son into a slot is because so many families pulled their kids out during the global pandemic. And so throughout my time representing the 7th Congressional District and traveling throughout, I live in the suburbs, so you would think that I would have easier access, but it's still very difficult there. But in these rural communities, there are no options in some of these communities where they are desperate for help. It's critical not only for families, but it's also critical for our businesses who are desperate to be able to hire and retain workers. We know that during the pandemic, women were impacted at twice the rate of men at pulling out, having to quit their job and stay at home with kids. And so we still haven't gotten back to pre-pandemic levels for women in the workforce. We know that the number one issue right now with our economy and rising costs, and what we could do to address rising costs, is address our workforce issues. And some of that is addressing access to childcare. I want to thank our leader, Whip Clark, for everything she's done to put this front and center. What it means to me when I was in the state Senate and we were going through the pandemic, knowing because of her and the people that I have the opportunity to serve with who are standing here, because of them, we were able to keep so many of our child care centers afloat that would have had to shut their doors. And people that put this, that care about the American people in these investments. We know outside of housing, this is one of the biggest pain points for families right now. And it is also when you're the most vulnerable financially in the early years of having a kid. It is not just a vulnerability financially, it is the best investment that we can make in kids and the likelihood of their success in the long term. So we have so much more to do here in Congress. And I get frustrated, unfortunately, with the lack of focus on the things that matter to people, to regular families who are desperate for help right now, and the chaos and dysfunction here in Washington. People want us to roll up our sleeves and get to work on solving issues like affordability and access to childcare. In Project 2025, they actually want to get rid of Head Start. Head Start I had the opportunity just to say hi. They visited my office, and they're going through mapping out all of the critical needs in Colorado for childcare deserts and what we can do to meet those needs. Families who are currently being served who are able to get back in the workforce. Their kids are taken care of because of these programs. And that is on the chopping block. That is on the Republican agenda. So I'm just so proud to be a part of advocating, pushing for the bills that would make an impact in families' lives. And I am grateful to serve with colleagues that also care so much about these issues, and parents and who have these experiences, who are underrepresented in Congress, to make sure that we prioritize this. And what we can do around rising costs is invest in the childcare facilities. So that's a huge cost for starting up a childcare center. So that's why this bill matters. We also know that workforce is a huge issue and that people have requirements for a higher education, but then they aren't paid for that education once they serve in these very important positions. So this is a big step forward. These are the things that we need to be focusing on in Congress. So proud to serve with these individuals. Thank you again to Whip Clark. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my other fellow mom here in Congress, Representative Jill Takuda.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And Jimmy, you have a toddler. I have 2 teenage boys. We should talk about what your future looks like. It's still rough. It's still rough. But mahalo. Mahalo to Whip Clark and to all my fellow colleagues here for their leadership and advocacy on what is a very important issue to families, and as you can hear, a very personal issue to all of us. 51% of Americans live in a childcare desert. 68% of Hawaii. California, Washington State, 60%. Massachusetts, 53% of the population. Colorado, 51% of the population. Virginia does the best for Jennifer's district with 47%, and that's still not good enough for us. Disproportionately impacted by a lack of childcare seats are families of color, moms of color like myself, living in rural America, many in lower income neighborhoods. In parts of my district, there are literally 1 open seat for 60 eligible children. And we have seen external impacts threaten to worsen already dire situations across the country. During COVID, House Democrats made sure that $24 billion in American Rescue Plan funds reached over 225,000 child care providers, impacting as many as 10 million children. These funds prevented nearly 75,000 permanent child care closures, saving more than 3 million seats for our youngest keiki. Knowing well that these funds were a lifeline for so many, Republicans still failed to join us in extending vital stabilization grants before they expire last year. And now tens of thousands of providers are vulnerable to closure. And if they do, let's be real, waiting lists will worsen, and parents will be forced to reduce their work hours, quit their jobs entirely, as Jimmy mentioned, or make impossible choices to care for their families. Another external impact that people don't often think about, but natural disasters are also devastating to childcare. They are sadly, as we see right now, hitting our communities more frequently, literally Florida on the cusp of a hurricane landfall. But as I know too well as well, whether it's tornadoes, floods, or wildfires. Wildfires destroyed Lahaina. We lost 102 lives. We're still looking for 2 of our loved ones there. But what we also lost, in addition to the buildings, the people, the family, the memories, the history, we lost 6 preschool centers, 2 infant toddler centers, and 1 family child care home. And those numbers may not seem big to you, but that was a permanent loss of at least 272 seats for families now displaced across our islands, our states, and even the continent. 272 seats at least that once cared for a child, that allowed a family to work, that gave a child hope for a better beginning that will never come back. That's the kind of impacts we see with disasters across our country. And when we talk about external impacts, let us not ignore the very real and significant threat of Project 2025, which calls for the elimination of Head Start. That's over 833,000 children denied access to nurturing learning environments, the greatest equalizer possible, giving them the chance for a better future. That's 1 too many families already living in the margins that will be forced into poverty in order to care for their children. Without action by Congress, a caring Congress, like Congress members you see next to me now, we face an all but certain future where programs will be forced to cut back on already less than needed staffing, and most importantly, seats and opportunity for our keiki. A future where our families are increasingly financially strained, can't put food on the table and educate their child at the same time. Or where a little one's lives, or how much their parents, where one lives, or how much their parents make determines whether or not they will be ready for kindergarten. That is not the future that I want for our children, for all of our children. We can and we must do better. You know, I'll share something very briefly before I introduce my esteemed colleague from Virginia. When I had our two little ones and they were 17 months apart, they basically felt like twin boys, which was a whole nother thing as well. We didn't know how to pay for childcare, and I was in the state senate, and there were very limited options for me to be able to take on a second, yet third job as well. We were able to refinance our home to make sure that our two children were able to access childcare and early childhood education. My youngest son needing a little bit more help because early intervention was cut off from him with changes that took place at both the state and federal level. But we know that not every family has the option to refinance their home to allow their child to be able to get cared for and to be educated and socially, emotionally supported as well. And when we thought about where we would put them, paying for it was just the first step. I remember us being on waiting list after waiting list, just like Brittany. We were going farther and farther out on the island to be able to find that childcare. And what struck me the most as we're thinking, okay, 45 minutes, an hour plus to be able to get back to our child. At the beginning or end of the day, I remembered when I was a young girl, and there was a threat of a very real tsunami in Hawaii, and my parents being trapped on the other side of the island, on the other side of the mountain. And I told my husband they need to be close, because I remember the terror and fear of not having my parents able to get to me, but more importantly, they were in danger and a mountain stood between me and them. I was going to make sure that a mountain never stood between me and my child. And right now, there is a huge mountain, a physical, a metaphorical one, a financial one that stands between families and being able to access childcare. And so these bills matter. And I want to thank Whip Clark for her leadership, my colleagues for standing up. It is going to take the action of all of us. We are going to fight like moms and dads to make sure that our keiki, our children, get the future, get the opportunities that they truly deserve. So thank you again for your leadership. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce the good Congresswoman from Virginia, Jen McClellan.
Good afternoon, morning, I think. I am excited to be here with Democratic Whip Catherine Clark and Representatives Bonamici, Pedersen, Gomez, and Takuda as we introduce two important bills to address our nation's child care crisis. We know the child care industry is in crisis and the impacts are severe for working families, as you've heard. But as one of the only 6% of members of Congress who are mothers to young children, one of only 3% of members of Congress who is a mother of color to young children, I know firsthand the difficulties that parents face when seeking quality, affordable child care options. For too long, the industry has suffered from a systemic lack of investment, going back to the days when child care was free labor, sometimes forced, to now underpaid. The COVID pandemic laid bare existing challenges and inequities in various facets of the care economy, including child care, elder care, care for people with disabilities. The burden has fallen largely on women. 1 out of 4 women who became unemployed during the pandemic cited a lack of child care as the reason, twice the rate for men. Family caregiving responsibilities both before and after the pandemic also fell predominantly on women, further complicating their participation in the workforce. Those challenges persist today. Among parents who are not working full-time, 3 in 5 say that they would choose to do so if they had access to affordable child care. Too often, parents face difficult choices: reduce their hours to care for their children or a family member, which is nearly always unpaid; arrange formal care, which may be too expensive to be financially worthwhile to continue working; or find informal care from a neighbor, close friend, or family member, often unpaid. And although we have made significant progress in rebuilding the workforce since the height of the pandemic, the care economy has not seen the same kind of recovery, as low wages and lack of benefits drive poor retention. This is born out of systemic, long-term underinvestment and lack of protection for care workers. This is an economic issue, an equity issue, a family issue. And we seek to address the child care crisis in our nation. We must take decisive steps to support care workers nationwide and provide them with the wages, benefits, and other resources that they deserve. House Democrats, under the leadership of Whip Clark, are fighting to do just that, to address the care economy's shortcomings, to support providers and caregivers, to give parents quality and affordable child care options. And these two bills, the Child Care Infrastructure Act and the Child Care Workforce Development Act, will help construct and modernize child care facilities nationwide and reinvest in early childhood educators. Again, child care, quality child care, is the foundation for strong, healthy communities and a thriving economy. You cannot work if you have nowhere to place your child. And we know now that 80% of the brain is developed by the time you're 3, 90% by the time you're 5. Our child care workers are entrusted with helping develop those brains for our children to get them kindergarten ready. And yet many of our child care workers don't even earn enough to put their own children in child care. That's deplorable, but we're here to do something about it. And I thank Whip Clark and my fellow Democratic colleagues for their leadership. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Jen. Oh, I am so grateful to these champions for childcare who continue our work of lowering costs for families at home and growing the middle class, as well as creating that opportunity economy. So at this time, we'd like to open it to questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Whip Clark. Eric Garcia at The Independent. You guys are talking a lot about Child Care Project 2025. On top of that, Senator J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate, has talked about helping grandma and grandpa, shoving off child care for grandma and grandpa. What are your thoughts and what's your response to what Senator Vance has said about child care for families?
Families are doing the most they can, and what J.D. Vance fails to recognize are the issues that families care about, that they're talking about around their kitchen tables, the issues that keep them up at night. We don't trust J.D. Vance to order donuts. We certainly don't trust him to take seriously lowering costs. He is so busy spreading misinformation and lies about what is at stake for this country, looking for ways to divide us. The American people are looking in at the chaos and the extremism that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance promote and saying, where do we fit into this picture? This is an issue of fundamentally about economic opportunity, coupled with giving our children the very best start. And there is a critical role for government to play here. We invest on average $500 a year in public dollars into a toddler's care. Other countries, including but not exclusive to other wealthy countries, high-income countries, invest on average $14,000 a year. There is a gap here, and it is working families around this country who are being asked to shoulder that burden.
Can I just add, Suzanne Bonamici from Oregon, J.D. Vance's proposed solution is completely detached from the reality for many families. Oftentimes, parents are working themselves. Oftentimes, parents are elderly, and there's a lot of people in what's called the sandwich generation. They're taking care of their kids and taking care of their parents. To suggest that that is a solution for every family is completely devoid from the facts. Again, as Whip Clark said, families who can do so are doing so, but there's a lot of people who don't have parents or grandparents or relatives nearby who can help.
Just add something on really quickly. I think, as we all know, there is a ton of hypocrisy and contradiction in Project 2025. You want grandparents to take care of our youngest Keiki? Take a look in your own communities at who are stocking shelves. who's working in a lot of our retail establishments, fast food restaurants. Our grandparents are working. Project 2025 wants to increase the age of eligibility for Social Security. The cost of living for everyday Americans, including our senior citizens, has gotten to a place where they can't stay home as much as they might want to take care of their loved ones. They are having to work to make sure they can keep a roof over their head and food on the table. Look at Project 2025. It literally removes every option from our youngest children to our senior citizens or retirees to live a dignified life. And so my question back to JD will be, look at your grandparents, look at all of our grandparents, look at our senior citizens and retirees. Are they even able to make a living, let alone take on the care and feeding of a child as well? Even when you take a look at SNAP benefits and eligibility, health care coverage, everything in Project 2025 and what has been put forward eliminates the ability for grandparents to even be able to be part of this care economy that we are talking about.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.